The mysterious disappearance. The small town of Oakwood had always been quiet, peaceful, and safe, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and the air was always filled with laughter from children playing outside. But one night, something happened that would change everything. It started with a single disappearance. Sophie, a 10-year-old girl, had been playing with her friends at the park just hours before. She had been excited, laughing as she ran around, chasing the other kids. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the streetlights flickered to life, Sophie's friends suddenly noticed she was gone. They searched the park, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. At first, her friends thought she had simply gone home without saying goodbye. But as hours passed and Sophie didn't return, panic set in. Her parents called the police, and soon, the whole town was out searching. They checked every corner of Oakwood, from the woods near the park to the small creek by the edge of town. But Sophie was nowhere to be found. As night fell, something strange began to happen. The town's once peaceful streets grew unnervingly quiet. It was as if a heavy silence had descended over Oakwood. There were no sounds of cars driving by, no distant barking of dogs, not even the rustling of the trees. The only noise was the sound of footsteps in the dark as search teams moved through the streets. The police found no clues. Sophie's disappearance was completely out of the ordinary. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, and no footsteps leading away from the park. It was as though she had simply vanished into thin air. The only thing left behind was a small, strange object near the edge of the park, an object that none of the police officers could identify. The object looked like a metallic disc, no bigger than a dinner plate. It was smooth, with no markings or distinguishing features. It was cold to the touch, almost unnaturally so. The officers were puzzled, but none of them had ever seen anything like it before. They took it in for further analysis, but it provided no answers. The disappearance wasn't just happening in Oakwood. A few days later, another child vanished. This time, it was a boy named Tyler, just a few years younger than Sophie. He had been playing outside his house when his mother stepped inside for just a few minutes. When she came back out, Tyler was gone. Again, there were no signs of a struggle, no footprints, nothing to suggest where he had gone. As the days passed, the number of missing children grew. It wasn't just Oakwood anymore. Other towns, even cities far away, were reporting similar disappearances. All the cases followed the same pattern. Children would vanish without a trace. No one knew where they had gone, and there were no clues left behind. The authorities were baffled. They started to wonder if these disappearances were connected. The media picked up the story, and soon the whole country was in a state of fear. People locked their doors at night and kept a close eye on their children. Parents were terrified, not knowing if their child would be the next to disappear. Then the reports started to get even stranger. People began to notice something odd happening around the areas where the children had disappeared. A faint, strange light would appear in the sky. It was hard to describe, as if it were a flickering, glowing shape that no one could quite understand. Some claimed it was just a trick of the light, but others were convinced it was something far more sinister. In Oakwood, the search for Sophie continued. The local police had expanded their search radius, reaching out to nearby towns. They organized search parties, asking for volunteers, and even brought in dogs to help. But as they scoured the area, they found nothing. Then, one night, the town's sheriff, David Walker, decided to do something no one else had thought to do. He stood outside the park, looking up at the sky, wondering if the light might be something more. It was then that he saw it. Just above the trees, a small, dim light flickered. At first, he thought it was an airplane, but it didn't move like any aircraft he had ever seen. The light seemed to hover in place, almost as if it were waiting. Sheriff Walker tried to follow the light, but it quickly faded, disappearing into the sky. He stood there for a long time, staring at the empty dark, wondering what it meant. Was it connected to the disappearances? Was it just a coincidence? The next morning, Sheriff Walker gathered the remaining search teams. He told them about the light he had seen, but no one was sure what to make of it. The idea that it could be connected to the kidnappings seemed far-fetched. But what other explanation was there? The children were disappearing without a trace, and no one could explain why. That evening, more strange things started to happen. People reported seeing the same odd light in other parts of town. It seemed to move, shifting from one location to another, and sometimes it would disappear altogether, only to reappear hours later in a completely different spot. Sheriff Walker had no answers, and neither did anyone else. But one thing was clear: the mystery of the missing children was deepening. The town, once full of laughter and joy, was now gripped by fear. And the strange light in the sky seemed to be the only clue that pointed toward the truth. But what was it? And who, or what, was behind the disappearance of the children? The people of Oakwood were about to find out. But what they didn't know was that the answer would be far more terrifying than they could ever imagine. Unseen forces at work. As the days passed, the atmosphere in Oakwood became increasingly tense. The once peaceful town was now filled with whispers and fear. The disappearance of Sophie had shaken the entire community, but it was the disappearance of Tyler that truly set everyone on edge. The idea that the children were vanishing with no trace, no sign of struggle, and no apparent reason, seemed impossible to understand. But what was even more unsettling was the growing sense that something far beyond human understanding was at play. Sheriff David Walker had been working tirelessly, trying to make sense of the strange events unfolding around him. He had contacted experts from nearby cities, hoping they might offer a solution, but all his efforts had been in vain. There were no answers. The local police had been stretched thin, searching for any clues that might explain the disappearances, but nothing added up. One evening, as the town's desperation reached a breaking point, Sheriff Walker received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Emily Carter, a renowned scientist and investigator specializing in unexplained phenomena, had heard about the strange disappearances and had come to Oakwood to offer her help. She was known for her work in researching unusual occurrences and had been called upon to investigate cases that defied explanation. Dr. Carter arrived at the sheriff's office with a calm, determined look on her face. She wasn't intimidated by the growing tension in Oakwood. In fact, she seemed more intrigued than anything else, as if she believed there was a scientific explanation behind it all. Her approach was methodical and precise. She immediately started examining the evidence: the strange metallic object found near the park, the eyewitness reports of flickering lights in the sky, and the bizarre patterns in the disappearances. After hours of analysis, Dr. Carter concluded something that no one had expected. The metallic object found near the park wasn't just a random piece of debris. It was a highly advanced piece of technology. In fact, it was unlike anything that had ever been seen on Earth. The material was far beyond current human capabilities, and the object's design didn't match anything in the known technological world. It was almost as if it had come from another planet, another civilization entirely. The sheriff listened carefully as Dr. Carter explained her findings. "This isn't just a strange object," she said, her voice steady but serious. "This is technology we don't understand. It could be a form of communication, or a device used to track or control something or someone. It could even be a part of a much larger system that we've yet to discover." Sheriff Walker's mind raced. Could this be the key to understanding what was happening to the children? Could this object be connected to their disappearance? The thought seemed far-fetched, but the more the sheriff thought about it, the more it made sense. After all, no one had seen any kidnappers. No one had heard a struggle. The children had simply vanished, as if they had been taken by some invisible force. Determined to find out more, Dr. Carter suggested they take a closer look at the area surrounding the park. The sheriff agreed, and together with a small group of volunteers, they ventured back to the site where Sophie had disappeared. The forest near the park had always been a place of mystery, but now it felt ominous. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches twisting in unnatural ways as if something, or someone, was watching. As they scoured the area, one of the volunteers, a young man named Jake, noticed something odd. At the edge of the woods, hidden beneath a pile of fallen leaves, was another strange object. This one was smaller than the first, but it had the same metallic sheen. The group carefully examined it, and Dr. Carter's face grew pale as she realized the connection. "This is the same technology," she muttered, her voice filled with disbelief. "This is no coincidence." As they continued to search the area, they discovered more objects hidden throughout the woods, small metallic discs, strange symbols carved into the trees, and faint marks on the ground that seemed to lead deeper into the forest. The pattern was becoming clearer. Whoever, or whatever, was behind these disappearances was leaving behind a trail that seemed to lead to some sort of hidden purpose. The sheriff had always believed in the logical, the explainable. But what they were uncovering wasn't logical at all. It felt like something out of a nightmare. The more they uncovered, the more the town began to feel like it was being pulled into an unknown world, a world where the laws of nature didn't seem to apply. As the group ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew colder. The sky above seemed to darken, even though it was only late afternoon. The shadows grew longer, and the trees seemed to close in around them. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching them, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, flickering, glowing in the distance. It wasn't like the lights from any normal vehicle or airplane. It was brighter, more intense, and it moved, quickly, vanishing as soon as it appeared. Dr. Carter and Sheriff Walker exchanged looks. The light, once again, had appeared. "Did you see that?" Dr. Carter asked, her voice tinged with urgency. "I saw it," the sheriff replied, his mind racing. "We need to follow it." Without another word, the group began to move in the direction of the light. As they walked, the ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate ever so slightly, almost as if something was shifting beneath the earth. The closer they got to the light, the stronger the sensation became. It was as though they were moving towards something massive, something otherworldly. As they rounded a bend in the trees, the light appeared again. This time, it was even brighter, and they could see something in the distance. It was a structure, something large, metallic, and alien. It stood silently in the clearing, almost as if it had always been there, hidden from human eyes until now. The sheriff's heart pounded in his chest. This was no ordinary building. This was something far beyond anything human hands had ever constructed. And it was here, in Oakwood, hidden away from the world. But why? As they cautiously approached the structure, the air grew even colder. A low hum vibrated in the air, and the ground beneath them seemed to pulse with energy. Whatever this was, it was powerful, and it was waiting for them. Sheriff Walker and Dr. Carter shared one final look before stepping forward. They knew they were no longer just investigating disappearances. They were on the edge of uncovering something far more dangerous, something that could change everything. But they had no idea just how much danger lay ahead. The first contact. The strange structure that Sheriff Walker and Dr. Carter had discovered in the woods stood as an enigma, casting a long shadow over Oakwood. It was a towering metallic monolith, smooth and imposing, unlike anything man-made. The hum in the air seemed to come from deep within its core, vibrating the earth beneath their feet. The trees around it were strangely silent, as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. For a moment, neither the sheriff nor Dr. Carter knew what to do. The sight of the structure was both mesmerizing and terrifying. It was clearly alien, yet it looked almost familiar, as though it had been part of the landscape for centuries, patiently waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The group approached cautiously, each step filled with both awe and fear. "Is this possible?" Sheriff Walker murmured, his eyes fixed on the object. Could it really be alien? Dr. Carter didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked up to the surface of the monolith, examining it with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. Her fingers brushed lightly against the cold metal, sending a ripple of energy through her body. She recoiled slightly, startled by the sudden surge of power that pulsed from within. "I don't know what this is, Sheriff," she said quietly, "but it's not from this world. It's not like anything we've ever seen." Before they could continue their investigation, a sudden noise broke the silence, a low, mechanical hum that seemed to emanate from the heart of the structure. Sheriff Walker instinctively reached for his radio, but before he could even turn it on, the ground beneath their feet began to shake, and the structure before them began to shift. The ground rumbled like an earthquake, and the trees swayed violently, as if a great force were moving beneath them. The air grew heavy with energy, and the temperature dropped sharply. In a matter of seconds, the metallic structure split down the middle, revealing a massive opening. The once silent forest was now alive with energy and anticipation. Out of the darkness within the structure, a figure emerged. It was tall, humanoid, but unlike anything human. The creature's skin was a pale, almost translucent shade of blue, its long limbs thin and sleek, moving with an unnerving grace. Its eyes glowed a deep, unsettling red, and its presence felt wrong. The creature studied them with a cold, emotionless gaze, and despite its inhuman appearance, there was an undeniable intelligence in those glowing eyes. Dr. Carter stepped back, instinctively reaching for her equipment. This is beyond anything I've ever studied. This is not just an alien. We're looking at something far more advanced than we could ever imagine." Sheriff Walker felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as he watched the creature. It wasn't just the creature's appearance that was unsettling. It was the way it seemed to perceive them, as though it had been waiting for them to arrive. There was no fear in its eyes, no surprise. It was as if it knew exactly who they were and why they were here. The creature spoke, but its voice was not what they expected. It didn't use sound. Instead, its words were transmitted directly into their minds. The voice was cold, mechanical, and it made their skin crawl. "We have been watching you," it said, its words echoing in their heads. "You have discovered what was meant to remain hidden. The children you seek are ours. They are not lost. They are part of our plan." Sheriff Walker's heart pounded as he struggled to comprehend the meaning of the words. "What do you mean, part of your plan? Where are the children?" he demanded, his voice cracking with both fear and determination. The creature's red eyes flickered slightly, as though considering the sheriff's question before responding. "The children are the key. They are a power source we require. Their energy will fuel the machines of our race, allowing us to evolve beyond this world. They will never return." The words struck like a blow, sending a chill down Sheriff Walker's spine. He had known something sinister was at work, but hearing it spoken aloud made it all the more real. These children weren't being kidnapped for some unknown reason. They were being harvested. They were being used to power an alien race's technology, a race that had been watching Earth for far longer than anyone could have imagined. Dr. Carter's mind raced. "Harvesting children," she whispered, almost to herself. "But why Earth? Why these children?" The creature's gaze shifted to her, and once again its voice resonated in her mind. "Your planet's resources are insufficient. Your race is too primitive. But these children, their energy is unlike anything we have encountered. They are special. They are our bridge to the next phase of existence." Sheriff Walker's mind reeled, struggling to process the enormity of what he was hearing. "You've been abducting children from Earth. For how long?" The creature tilted its head slightly, as if amused by the question. "Long enough to ensure your species will never be able to stop us. We have been patient. You will not be the first to fall." Suddenly, there was a loud, echoing sound from within the structure, like something awakening. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath them trembled once again. The creature's red eyes narrowed, and it took a step forward, its presence growing more menacing. "You should not have come here," the creature warned, its voice now laced with something darker. "Your time is running out." Without warning, The sheriff raised his weapon, but the creature didn't flinch. It was as if the gun had no effect on it. Before he could react, a beam of intense light shot from the creature's hand, striking the ground near them. The energy from the beam caused the earth to crack and tremble, and the air filled with an overwhelming, otherworldly hum. The sheriff stumbled back, struggling to regain his balance. Dr. Carter's mind was working furiously, trying to process the information. These beams weren't just hostile. They were calculating, purposeful, and incredibly powerful. They had a plan, and humanity was nothing more than an obstacle to their greater goal. "Run," Dr. Carter gasped, her eyes wide with realization. "We're not equipped to fight them. We need to leave. Now." Sheriff Walker hesitated, his eyes locked on the creature as it stood unfazed by their panic. But then, with a forceful shove, he pulled Dr. Carter back, urging the group to retreat. The creature made no attempt to stop them, but its cold, unblinking stare followed them as they scrambled to escape. As they ran, the only thought in Sheriff Walker's mind was a terrifying one. This was just the beginning. The aliens had only shown them a glimpse of their power, and there was far more at stake than they could have ever imagined. Inside the alien ship, the escape from the alien structure was only the beginning of the true nightmare that awaited Sheriff Walker and Dr. Carter. As they fled back into the woods, the creature's piercing red eyes haunted them. The chilling words it had spoken echoed in their minds. "Your time is running out." The sense of urgency was overwhelming, but they didn't stop. They had no choice but to keep moving, driven by the desire to protect the children and understand just what they were up against. After what felt like hours of scrambling through the dense forest, they stumbled upon something far more unsettling. The trees parted, revealing a vast clearing where the ground was scorched and cracked, as though something had violently touched down from the sky. In the center of the clearing was a ship, massive, metallic, and sleek, unlike any craft made by humanity. It hovered just above the ground, silent and ominous, exuding an eerie energy that seemed to distort the very air around it. "This is impossible," Dr. Carter whispered, her voice trembling with awe and fear. "It's not just an alien base. This is their ship. This is where the children are being taken." Sheriff Walker looked at the ship in disbelief. His heart raced, and his gut twisted with a cold fear he had never known. The realization was clear. This wasn't just an isolated operation. This was part of a larger, coordinated effort. The children weren't simply being kidnapped. They were being taken across the stars. "What now?" the sheriff asked, his voice hoarse. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to Dr. Carter or to himself, but it didn't matter. The answer seemed impossible. Dr. Carter stood frozen for a moment, deep in thought. Her scientific mind raced, trying to make sense of the unfathomable. "We have to get inside," she said, finally breaking the silence. "We need to understand their technology, how they're doing this, and we need to find the children before it's too late." Sheriff Walker hesitated. He had never imagined that he would find himself standing in front of an alien spacecraft, let alone be considering boarding it. But he knew that the children were depending on them. The world was depending on them. And despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, there was no other choice. The ship seemed to beckon them, its surface smooth and glimmering with an almost hypnotic light. As they approached, an opening in the side of the ship appeared, almost as though it had sensed their presence. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and an unfamiliar, yet welcoming warmth poured out from within. Steeling themselves, Sheriff Walker and Dr. Carter stepped inside. The interior of the ship was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was vast, cavernous, with walls made of an organic, glowing material that seemed to pulse with life. The floors were smooth, reflecting the light in strange patterns that danced across the room. Everything was illuminated with an eerie blue glow, the same color as the creature's eyes. The air was thick, almost alive, and as they ventured further into the ship, they could feel the hum of energy all around them. "This is beyond anything I've ever studied," Dr. Carter murmured. "It's not just technology, it's something else. It's almost as if the ship itself is alive." Sheriff Walker scanned their surroundings. "We need to find the children," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "They could be anywhere on this ship." They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the strange, soft material beneath them. The deeper they went into the ship, the more the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just the eerie glow of the walls, or the pulsating energy. It was the silence. There were no crew members to be seen, no alien beings moving about. It was as though the ship was abandoned, or perhaps the occupants were waiting for something. A sharp metallic noise broke the silence, and both of them froze. Ahead of them, the walls began to shift, and a door opened with a soft whoosh. They exchanged a glance, instinctively knowing that this was it. This was where the children were being kept. They approached the door cautiously, weapons drawn, prepared for whatever might lie on the other side. When the door slid open, they found themselves in a large chamber, unlike any human prison or containment area. The walls were lined with strange, transparent pods, each one filled with a glowing liquid. Inside these pods were children, dozens of them, suspended in the strange, viscous substance. Their eyes were closed, their bodies motionless, as if in a deep sleep. Dr. Carter rushed to one of the pods, her face pale, as she looked inside. "They're alive," she whispered, "but they're in some kind of stasis. The liquid, it's keeping them in a suspended state. They're not being harmed, but they're not free either." Sheriff Walker's stomach turned as he gazed at the children, each one looking so innocent, so helpless. He could see their faces, pale and peaceful, but there was something deeply unsettling about their stillness. It felt as though they were waiting for something to happen. "We need to get them out," Sheriff Walker said firmly. His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't care. Every second counted. They couldn't afford to waste time. Dr. Carter moved quickly, examining the pod in front of her. "I can't just break them out," she said, her hands trembling as she worked. "The technology is far beyond anything we have, but I might be able to access the control systems, find a way to disable the stasis fields. We'll need to hurry." As she worked, the silence in the chamber grew more oppressive. The hum of the ship's machinery was louder now, as if it were responding to their presence. Suddenly, a deep, booming voice echoed through the ship, though no one was present to speak. "You should not have come here," the voice said, resonating in their minds like a shockwave. "The children are ours. You will not take them." Sheriff Walker's heart raced as he scanned the room. The voice was cold, metallic, but somehow familiar. It was the creature they had encountered earlier, the one that had warned them. "We don't have time for this," he muttered, looking back at Dr. Carter. "We have to move now." But it was too late. The ship's lights flickered, and the walls began to shift violently. The floor beneath them rumbled, and the pods holding the children began to rise, moving away from them as though they were being transported to another location. Before they could react, the chamber door slammed shut with a deafening sound, locking them inside. The lights dimmed, and the energy in the air grew even more intense. "We've triggered something," Dr. Carter whispered in panic. "This ship is responding to us. It's going to stop us from saving them." Sheriff Walker looked around desperately. The walls were closing in, and they were running out of time. The ship was no longer just a place. It had become a living, hostile entity. The true fight for the children's freedom had just begun, and they had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The unexpected twist. As the walls of the chamber closed in, Sheriff Walker's heart pounded in his chest. The ship's response was unlike anything they had anticipated. The sudden, violent shift of the pods, the locking of the doors, everything had escalated far beyond what they thought they could control. The air inside the room had grown thick with a strange, almost suffocating energy, and the low hum of the ship now felt like a warning, vibrating through their bones. Dr. Carter had been at the control panel, desperately trying to override the system, But now she was frozen in place, her fingers hovering over the blinking lights as her face paled with realization. "I can't stop it," she muttered, voice shaking. "The system, it's been locked down. The pods, the children, they're being moved to a secure location." Sheriff Walker's mind raced. They were running out of options. "Where are they being moved to?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the growing panic. Dr. Carter looked at the screen again, her brow furrowed in confusion. I don't know. There's a hidden area on the ship, one that doesn't show up on the main maps. It's off the grid." Before they could react, the ship shook violently again, throwing them both off balance. The walls began to ripple, and a loud mechanical grinding sound echoed from deep within the ship, followed by a flash of brilliant, searing light. The room's atmosphere thickened, and then a sudden silence fell. And then they heard it. A voice, distorted, unnatural, echoed through the chamber, more forceful than before. This time, it wasn't coming from the ship's speakers. It was coming directly from their minds, cutting through their thoughts like a blade. "You are not welcome here." Sheriff Walker's eyes widened in shock. It was the voice of the creature they had encountered earlier, but it wasn't just speaking to them anymore. It was everywhere. In their heads, their hearts, their very souls. It was like the ship itself had become aware of them. An entity that no longer saw them as intruders, but as something far more dangerous. "We've been watching you, Sheriff Walker, Dr. Carter." The voice continued, its tone colder now, more sinister. "You think you are rescuing these children, but you are wrong. The children you see here are not the ones you know." Dr. Carter's hand shook as she tried to process the new revelation. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The ship pulsed again, and the creature's voice grew louder, more insistent. "These children are not human. They were never meant to be. You have been led to believe that they are Earth's children, but they were taken from your world long before you realized. They are our creations, born from the energy we harvested, and they are the key to our ascendancy." Sheriff Walker's head spun as the weight of the creature's words sank in. These children, these innocent faces, were not victims of some alien abduction. They were something else entirely. They were part of a much darker, more complex plan. They were engineered. Dr. Carter gasped, understanding dawning on her. "But why? Why use Earth's children? They are more than you realize." The voice responded coldly. "Their energy, their potential, it is far greater than yours. We've been waiting for this moment, for the final phase of our evolution." Sheriff Walker's heart sank as he began to piece together the horrifying truth. These children weren't being harvested for energy. They were the energy. The creatures had used them as vessels, fusing their own technology with human DNA, creating a new race of beings that could transcend their biological limitations. These children were no longer truly human. They were the building blocks of something far more powerful. Dr. Carter's eyes filled with horror. "No, this can't be. You're using them as batteries, as tools for your own evolution." The voice laughed, a chilling, hollow sound that echoed through the chamber. "You are correct, Dr. Carter. But there is more. Much more. These children are not simply power sources. They are vessels of knowledge. Their consciousness is already linked to ours, a collective intelligence that spans galaxies. They are the bridge between our species and yours. And once they are fully awakened, once their power is unlocked, they will bring about the end of humanity's reign." The weight of the revelation was almost too much to bear. The children they had come to save were not victims. They were the instruments of humanity's doom. And it was clear now that the aliens had planned this for centuries. Their patience was evident in every move they made, every step they took toward this final stage. Earth was merely a stepping stone in their grand design. Sheriff Walker clenched his fists, his mind racing. "You won't get away with this," he growled. "We will stop you." The voice responded with cold finality. "You cannot stop what you do not understand. The process has already begun. You are too late. Suddenly, the ship shuddered, and a bright, blinding light engulfed the room. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy as the children inside the pods began to stir. Their eyes, once closed in a state of suspended animation, opened, glowing with the same eerie red light that had marked the creature's gaze. A low, harmonious hum filled the room, and the energy in the air seemed to grow thick, almost tangible. The children were awakening. Sheriff Walker and Dr. Carter stood frozen, watching in horror as the first child began to levitate slightly within the pod, their bodies surrounded by a glowing, pulsating aura. Their energy was now fully integrated with the alien technology, and there was no turning back. The ship's control systems began to come alive, and the children, now fully awake, fully transformed, began to rise from their pods. They no longer looked entirely human. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural, terrifying brilliance. Their movements were slow, deliberate, and their voices. They no longer spoke as children, but as something far older, far wiser. And then one of them spoke, its voice both childlike and ancient at once. "It is time." The ship shook again, louder this time. Sheriff Walker's blood ran cold as he realized the full extent of what they were facing. The aliens were no longer just a threat. They were evolving. The children were their final piece, the key to their supremacy. And now, the battle to save Earth had truly begun. The battle for survival. The air in the ship felt thick with the hum of energy as the once innocent children, now transformed into something unrecognizable, floated freely from their pods. Their eyes, glowing with the same red intensity as the creatures, locked onto Sheriff Walker and Dr. Carter with an eerie focus. It was as if the transformation had not only enhanced their abilities, but also connected them to the very heart of the alien ship, turning them into something far more dangerous than the human children they had been just hours ago. The first child that floated toward them didn't speak. Instead, they raised their hand, and a force, like an invisible wave of energy, pushed Sheriff Walker backward, slamming him into the wall. His breath was knocked out of him, and for a moment, he couldn't move. The child's powers were beyond anything he had ever imagined. Their body wasn't just a vessel. It was a conduit for unimaginable power. "Stay back," Dr. Carter shouted, pulling the sheriff to his feet. "They're not the children we knew anymore. They're something else." The child hovered in place, studying them with those glowing eyes, as if weighing their existence. Then, to Sheriff Walker's horror, it spoke, not in a child's voice, but in a deep alien tone that made his skin crawl. "You are too late. The transformation is complete. We are beyond your reach." Dr. Carter, her mind racing, grabbed the sheriff's arm, pulling him back into the shadows as more children began to float out of their pods. The chamber they were in now seemed less like a ship and more like a vast, interconnected network. The walls pulsed with energy, and strange symbols began to appear on the surfaces around them, glowing faintly with an ominous light. It was as though the ship itself was awakening, reacting to the newly evolved children. "We need to get to the control room," Dr. Carter whispered urgently. "We need to stop them, or Earth is lost. If we don't, they will control everything we've ever known." Sheriff Walker nodded, his face set in grim determination. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. The children were no longer under their control. They were something new, something dangerous. And the worst part was that they were still human in ways that made their transformation even more terrifying. They still remembered what it was like to be a child, but now they were wielding power that could wipe out entire civilizations. As they crept toward the ship's core, the walls seemed to close in around them. The children's abilities were growing stronger with every passing second, their movements quicker, more deliberate. It was impossible to tell which one was in control, whether the children were now leading the ship or if the ship had begun to control them. "Do you see it?" Dr. Carter asked in a low voice, pointing to a large central chamber ahead. It was enormous, filled with rows of alien technology, pulsing with lights and shifting metallic forms. The heart of the ship, she realized, the place where everything converged. But as they moved closer, the sound of soft footsteps stopped them in their tracks. Another child. This one was different. While the others floated and emitted strange energy fields, this child walked, slowly, deliberately, with an aura of calm that made it even more unnerving. Their eyes, however, were not red. They were white, empty, as though something had entirely consumed them. There was no trace of the innocence they had once known. This child wasn't just connected to the ship, it was the ship. "Stop," the child said in a voice that was both familiar and alien, their tone almost soothing. "You cannot stop what is inevitable." Sheriff Walker reached for his weapon instinctively, but before he could pull it out, the child raised one hand. Immediately, the weapon was torn from his grip by an invisible force and hurled across the room. The air crackled with tension, and he felt his body tense, as if his every muscle was being restrained. "Why are you doing this?" Dr. Carter shouted, her voice desperate, her scientific mind struggling to understand the impossible situation they were in. These children, why turn them into this? They were meant to be free. The child with the white eyes tilted its head, as if considering her words, before responding in a tone that was strangely calm, detached. "Their freedom was always an illusion. The humans you know have no true understanding of the universe. We are bringing them into a higher state. They will become the bridge between our worlds, and you, your kind, will either evolve or perish." Sheriff Walker's grip tightened as he fought against the invisible force holding him. This was no longer just about saving children. It was about stopping the inevitable, a future where humanity would no longer be the dominant species. He glanced at Dr. Carter, who seemed just as determined, her eyes filled with both fear and resolve. "We need to disable the core," Dr. Carter said urgently. "If we destroy the heart of this ship, we can stop the transformation. It's the only chance we have." "Do it," the sheriff said, his voice grim. "We don't have much time." Dr. Carter darted toward a panel in the wall, frantically scanning it. Her fingers danced over the alien interface, trying to make sense of the symbols and patterns. But the more she tried, the more the ship fought back. The walls trembled and the lights flickered, as if the ship itself were trying to protect its heart from being destroyed. "Come on," she muttered to herself, her breath shallow as the pressure built. The room began to grow colder, the ship's energy shifting into overdrive. The transformation was reaching its final stage. The children, now fully awakened, had begun to converge on the chamber, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity. And then it happened. A loud, unearthly shriek filled the air as the ship's energy core became fully exposed, its brilliant, blinding light casting everything in stark relief. The children began to levitate once more, surrounding the core like moths to a flame. "This is it," Dr. Carter said, her voice shaking. "We have to act fast." With a final desperate push, she slammed her hand onto a glowing panel, triggering a cascade of sparks and power surges. The ship's hum turned into a violent roar, the walls cracking as the energy that powered the transformation began to destabilize. Sheriff Walker grabbed Dr. Carter's arm, pulling her toward the exit, but before they could reach it, the children began to scream. The sound was like 1,000 voices, layered together, filled with both anguish and power. They were no longer just vessels. They had become something far more dangerous, something humanity could never have imagined. The ship was fighting back. And with it, the battle for Earth's survival had become something far darker than they had ever prepared for. The ultimate consequence. The ship's walls shook violently, the ground beneath Sheriff Walker and Dr. Carter trembling as the chaos erupted around them. The children, once helpless, now powerful and alien, screamed in unison. Their cries reverberated through the entire vessel, and the force of their collective energy seemed to tear at the very fabric of the ship itself. It was as if they were no longer just part of the ship. They had become the ship, and the ship had become them. Sheriff Walker and Dr. Carter staggered, their every step now fighting against the immense energy coursing through the walls. The ship was alive, its every pulse an extension of the children's newfound power, and it was determined to destroy anyone who stood in its way. It was no longer just about stopping the transformation. It was about survival. "We need to move faster," Dr. Carter shouted, her voice almost drowned out by the cacophony of alien shrieks filling the air. "The core's destabilizing, but it's too late to shut it down completely. We need to get out of here." Sheriff Walker could feel the walls pressing in on them, the pulse of the ship's energy growing stronger, faster. The path ahead seemed to shift with every moment, the corridors warping and twisting as if the ship itself were changing shape to trap them. They had no choice but to run, their only goal now to escape the ship's growing fury. But even as they sprinted down the corridors, a part of them knew that escaping wasn't enough. The alien race had succeeded in what they set out to do. The children were fully transformed, more powerful than they had ever been, and connected to the heart of the ship, the alien collective consciousness. It was only a matter of time before the transformation reached its peak, and with it, the birth of a new species that would reign over Earth. "Where's the exit?" Sheriff Walker panted, his chest tight from the strain. Dr. Carter's eyes darted around frantically. She had been studying the ship's layout, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. "We're not going to make it to the escape pods, but there's another way, a place where we can destroy the ship from the inside. We can overload the core, cause a chain reaction that'll tear it apart, but it'll take everything we've got." The weight of Dr. Carter's words settled on the sheriff like a heavy weight. To destroy the ship, they would need to sacrifice themselves. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about saving Earth anymore. It was about ensuring that the alien race never took root on their world. The ship's tremors grew more violent, and the air crackled with electric energy. The children's cries had grown louder, their forms now flickering in and out of visibility as if they were stretching the boundaries of reality itself. It was clear they were no longer bound by the physical limitations of human bodies. They were something else, something vast and incomprehensible. "We have to do it, Sheriff," Dr. Carter said, her voice steady despite the terror surrounding them. "We have no choice. This is the only way to stop them." The sheriff nodded, though his heart weighed heavy. They were about to do the unthinkable. The thought of never seeing Earth again, never seeing the people they had fought so hard to protect, nearly overwhelmed him. But he knew there was no other choice. The alien race had already taken too much. If they didn't act now, the entire world would fall. They pushed forward, knowing that every second brought them closer to their goal, and closer to their final moments. Finally, they reached the heart of the ship, a vast chamber filled with pulsating energy. The core was exposed, its light blinding, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The ship's power surged in waves, and Sheriff Walker could feel the immense pressure building. Every step they took seemed to draw them deeper into the heart of this nightmare. Dr. Carter approached a panel embedded in the wall, her fingers flying across the alien controls. "I found it," she said, her voice trembling with concentration. "I can trigger the overload, but we have to be quick. The ship is already preparing for its final transformation. Once the children reach full power, nothing will be able to stop them." Sheriff Walker stood watch, keeping his eyes on the flickering figures of the children as they surrounded the chamber, their eyes glowing like burning embers. They were aware of what was happening. They were aware of them. But it no longer mattered. The sheriff and Dr. Carter had no choice. They couldn't wait for the aliens to destroy Earth. They had to act, no matter the cost. "Do it," Sheriff Walker urged, his voice low but resolute. "Do it now." With a deep breath, Dr. Carter slammed her hand onto the final control, and the room seemed to explode with energy. A blinding flash of light filled the chamber, and the ship screamed in pain, its structure groaning as the core overloaded. The walls began to crack, and the children's forms flickered uncontrollably. They were fighting the inevitable, but it was too late. The ship was collapsing under its own power. Sheriff Walker grabbed Dr. Carter's arm, pulling her toward the exit as the room began to disintegrate around them. "We have to get out now," he shouted. But as they ran, the ship's energy intensified. The walls cracked, splitting apart as if the very ship were being torn in half. The children, their eyes still glowing with that haunting red light, began to scream in a chorus of anguish, their voices blending with the ship's death rattle. The two of them raced toward the exit, but they could feel it. The ship was dying, and they were going down with it. As they neared the final escape pod, the ground gave way beneath their feet, and the explosion of energy from the ship's destruction sent them flying. When the dust cleared, they found themselves in the open, in the final moments before the ship's destruction. The ship exploded in a massive burst of light and force, and the shockwave sent them hurtling through the air. For a long moment, everything was still. And then Sheriff Walker opened his eyes. They were on Earth. The ship was gone. The children, what was left of them, were gone. The alien invasion had been stopped. But the cost had been high. As the dust settled around them, both Sheriff Walker and Dr. Carter knew that the battle was far from over. They had won the first fight, but the consequences of what had happened would ripple through time. Earth had been spared, for now. But the question remained, how long would humanity remain safe from the forces beyond the stars? Would there be more ships, more battles, or had this been just the beginning of a new war, one that had only just begun? The ultimate consequences of their victory still hung heavy in the air, but one thing was certain: Earth would never be the same again.